I'd saved for years for a new car, not a flashy sports car with a roaring engine, not some shiny luxury ride that would scream for attention on the road. No, just a dependable Sedan. Practical, reliable, something that would get me to work every morning without the constant anxiety of praying the old rust bucket I'd been driving wouldn't die at the intersection. For me, signing those papers at the dealership felt monumental. It wasn't just a transaction. It was a quiet, hard-earned victory. The kind that came after years of sacrifices, skipping vacations, saying no to nights out, working extra hours even when I was exhausted. For once, I wasn't pouring my savings into someone else's needs, not into another family emergency, not into patching up one of Julia's endless mistakes. This was mine. I remember how my hands trembled when I slid the pen across the final line. The salesman handed me the keys, his face all polite smiles, but I hardly noticed him. My eyes locked on the fob in my hand. It was small, unassuming, but it felt like holding a declaration of independence. I'd finally bought something no one could twist, no one could take away. At least, that's what I thought. When I pulled into the driveway, the car still smelling new, I half expected cheers. Maybe that was naive, but a part of me longed for it. I imagined my mom saying, "Wow, Isabel, we're so proud of you," or my dad clapping me on the back with that rare look of approval. Instead, what I got was silence, followed by a look that stung more than words. Mom's eyes lit up, but not at me. Her gaze swept past me like I was invisible and landed straight on Julia, who had just stepped out of the house. Julia's lips parted into a grin that said everything without a word. "This is mine now." Then there was Dad. He didn't say anything right away, but the look he gave me, tight-lipped, brow furrowed, was the same one he always gave whenever I dared to push back against Julia's whims. A warning. A silent order. Don't cause trouble. Don't ruin the mood. I barely turned off the engine when Mom said it. "Isabel, don't you think Julia could use the car too? She's starting her new job next week, and you know how important first impressions are. She'll need it more than you." Her tone wasn't a suggestion, it was a declaration dressed up as concern. My chest tightened, the air leaving me in a sharp breath. I wanted to laugh, but it came out bitter. Julia needed it more than me? Julia, the sister who had already had everything handed to her, who never seemed to suffer the consequences of her mistakes. The same sister who had once stolen my scholarship opportunity after my parents decided she had a brighter future. The sister who lived rent-free in the basement while I paid my share of household bills without complaint. And now my car? The anger rose so fast I could feel my pulse hammering in my neck. "It's my car," I said, each word clipped, my voice low but shaking with heat. "I bought it. Julia can get her own." Julia tilted her head, her expression sliding into that smirk I'd seen too many times, the one that said she'd already won. She leaned against the hood like she was testing ownership, not even flinching at my protest. "Oh, come on," she drawled, her voice dripping with mock pity. "You never liked driving anyway. You hate traffic, you hate long commutes. Why not let me take it? I'll put it to better use." Better use. The phrase stabbed me. I could practically hear my parents' agreement before they even opened their mouths. Dad cleared his throat but avoided looking at me, like it was easier to pretend I wasn't standing there. Mom sighed, that dramatic, performative sigh she always used whenever I dared to resist Julia. And then it happened. Without hesitation, without shame, without even acknowledging me, they handed her the keys. The world tilted in that moment. It wasn't just about the car, it was about years of being second place in my own family. Years of swallowing disappointment, of being told Julia needed it more, that Julia was more fragile, more in need of support. Watching those keys slip into her hands wasn't a single blow. It was every slight, every injustice. Every time my parents chose her over me condensed into one sharp betrayal. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt, my nails digging into my palms until I thought I'd break skin. My throat burned with words I wanted to spit, but I knew what would happen if I did. Dad would glare, Mom would scold, Julia would play the victim, and I'd once again be painted as the selfish, ungrateful daughter. But inside, something shifted. The anger wasn't wild or uncontrollable, it was steady, grounding. I wasn't the weak one anymore. They thought they'd stolen my victory the way they always did, but this time was different. Because this time, I hadn't played into their script. And though I didn't say it out loud, one thought repeated in my mind like a drum beat, sharp and unyielding. This is not going to end the way you think it will. Days later, I got the call. Julia's voice came over the line, smooth and measured, carefully coated with the kind of fake innocence that had always made my skin crawl. "Hey, so, there was a little accident, nothing major. Just a scratch, really," she said, each word calibrated to sound casual, like she was reporting on spilled coffee instead of someone's brand new car. I froze, phone pressed to my ear, disbelief solidifying into a tight knot in my chest. "A scratch?" I asked, my voice a mixture of incredulity and barely contained anger. "Julia, are you serious?" "Oh yeah," she said, twirling a lock of her hair around her finger. "Nothing big. The airbags went off, but it's fine. Honestly, I was just trying to impress some friends from work." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles were white, and my stomach turned. I didn't even reply. There were no words that could capture the surge of fury, disbelief, and helplessness building inside me. Every principle, every ounce of patience I had cultivated over the years snapped in a quiet, poisonous scream. By the time I reached the street where she wrecked the car, my chest felt hollow. My heart beat too fast and too slow at the same time, like it had been thrown off rhythm by the sheer audacity of her words. Then I saw it. My brand new Sedan, gleaming and pristine when I'd first bought it, was crumpled against a streetlight. The front end was mangled, twisted metal and shattered glass reflecting the sunlight in jagged flashes. The airbags sagged, deflated now, a stark reminder that the collision had been violent. The tires were misaligned, one even looking flattened, the alloy rims scuffed and bent. A scratch? My voice caught in my throat, a strangled sound that was part laughter, part grief. Julia leaned against the side of the car, looking almost casual, the smirk still in place as if she'd just stepped off a stage after performing her role perfectly. "It wasn't that bad," she muttered, almost to herself, her tone defensive but nonchalant. "I was just trying to impress some friends from work." She gave a shrug that seemed rehearsed, an automatic gesture designed to absolve her of any responsibility. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her until she realized what she had done. My vision blurred with a mixture of rage and helplessness, each heartbeat pounding like a hammer against my temples. The air felt too thin, too heavy, like the universe had compressed around me to magnify the injustice of the moment. This wasn't just about a car. It was about years of unfair treatment, favoritism, and a family system that rewarded entitlement and punished diligence. I turned toward my parents, seeking the fury, the outrage, the parental outrage that I expected to see. I imagined my mom gasping, my dad storming forward to protect what was mine. But no. Mom stood with her hands on her hips, her expression lazy and unimpressed. "She's young, Isabel," she said, her voice calm, almost soothing, as if she were talking about a minor scrape on a kitchen counter instead of the total wreckage of my property. "She was trying to make an impression. Don't be so hard on her." I felt my stomach drop. Every muscle in my body tensed, every nerve ending screaming in protest. They weren't just blind, they didn't care. Their indifference was worse than any crash, any dent, any ruined engine. The betrayal ran deeper than metal and paint. It ran through the years, through every choice they'd made that placed Julia above me, through every scholarship, every allowance, every empty compliment that had always gone to her. My chest ached with the weight of it. Julia, oblivious to the storm she'd unleashed, ran her fingers through her hair again, flipping it back with the casual elegance of someone completely untethered from responsibility. "Relax, Isabel," she said, leaning against the dented hood. "It's not that big a deal. Honestly, I think it looks kind of cool, like those action movie crashes. You're overreacting." I swallowed hard, tasting bile at the back of my throat. "Overreacting?" I whispered, but the sound was lost in the wind. It wasn't overreacting, it was shock, it was anger. It was a grief-stricken realization that for as long as I could remember, my efforts, my victories, my possessions, my boundaries, none of them mattered in this house. None of them had ever mattered. I studied the car again, the way the metal was crumpled as if it were mocking me, the way the airbags sagged like the ghost of my triumph, the shattered glass glittering like tiny reminders of my defeat. My chest felt like it had been slammed with a hammer, each exhale shallow, each inhale tight, jagged. And then I looked at Julia, and finally I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. In their eyes, my pain was irrelevant. My losses were invisible. My anger? Inconsequential. This wasn't just a car, it was the embodiment of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd clawed for while everyone else took the shortcuts. And now it was gone, twisted and ruined, with my parents standing by, applauding, figuratively, if not literally, the golden child's performance. I felt the sting, the heat, the almost physical ache of betrayal pressed down on me. And yet, beneath it all, a seed of something else stirred. Something quiet, something fierce. I wasn't powerless. I might have been denied support, dismissed and ignored, but the story wasn't over. I didn't yet know how or when or what the next move would be, but even in this gut-wrenching, chest-clenching moment of loss, something inside me bristled with unspoken defiance. For the first time in years, the anger wasn't just pain, it was the start of something else, something I couldn't ignore. What my parents and Julia didn't know, couldn't have guessed even in their most arrogant imaginings, was that long before they ever touched the keys, I had put measures in place that made this exact moment almost inevitable. The car, the symbol of my independence and hard work, had been legally mine from the start. Every piece of paperwork, registration, title, insurance, was signed exclusively in my name. And more importantly, the insurance policy carried a stipulation so precise, it might as well have been etched in stone. Any unauthorized driver? Not covered. It wasn't malice. It wasn't about revenge. I wasn't scheming from some dark, vindictive corner of my heart. No, it was self-preservation. I had survived too many of Julia's disasters, scholarship hijackings, rent-free stints, reckless spending that left me cleaning up the fallout. I knew that if this car ended up in her hands and she somehow managed to wreck it, my parents would find a way to shift the blame, to expect me to shoulder the costs, to act as if I had somehow failed to supervise her. This was insurance against inevitability, a quiet rebellion wrapped in legalese and fine print. When I arrived at the scene, the devastation of the car had already punched through my chest, but standing there facing Julia as she twirled a strand of hair around her finger and flashed that self-satisfied smirk, something inside me shifted. The familiar gnawing anger that had threatened to swallow me whole started to morph into a different sensation, calm, steady, almost intoxicating in its clarity. Julia looked at me, expecting tears, expecting a breakdown, expecting the classic response I'd been trained to give since childhood: fear, frustration, compliance. She wanted me small, defeated, apologetic for even existing. And for the first time in years, I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I drew in a slow, deliberate breath, letting the air fill me like armor. My pulse, still quick from the initial shock of seeing my mangled car, began to steady. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch, letting it weigh on her, let it settle uncomfortably over my parents, whose casual shrug earlier had cut deeper than any dent or scratch ever could. Finally, I spoke. My voice was quiet, controlled, precise. The voice of someone who had studied the situation from every angle, who had foreseen the consequences long before anyone else could imagine them. "Good thing," I said softly, almost conversationally, "it's not my car anymore." The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended by the shock of reality. Julia's smile faltered, the smirk vanishing like fog in sunlight. For a brief, telling moment, she looked genuinely confused, almost vulnerable, the first time I had seen cracks in her carefully maintained facade. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice betraying a flicker of uncertainty. I reached into my bag, producing the documents I had kept meticulously organized for just this eventuality. The car registration, the insurance policy, copies of the signed legal documents confirming the title was mine alone. I spread them carefully across the hood of the crumpled Sedan, letting the stark black and white text speak louder than any shouting, any anger, any pleading could. Every signature, every clause, every formal line of print was a reminder that I had anticipated their every move, that I had taken control when they assumed I had no agency. "You wrecked something that doesn't belong to you," I said, my tone steady, almost clinical, as if stating an undeniable law of physics. "And the insurance won't cover a cent. Have fun explaining that." The silence that followed was palpable. Julia's eyes darted from the papers to me, panic slowly creeping into her expression, the edges of her carefully constructed confidence fraying. My parents, for the first time, looked unsettled. Their shrug was gone, replaced by confusion, by that unspoken recognition that they had misjudged the situation entirely. I saw in their eyes the realization that their assumptions, their favoritism, their insistence that Julia was entitled, had left them exposed. The weight of hope settled in me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. This was the first time in years I could see the tangible evidence of foresight and preparation translating into freedom. Not freedom from the chaos Julia often brought, not freedom from the family politics I had navigated so carefully, but freedom from the expectation that my life, my possessions, my hard work were always collateral damage in their schemes. I watched as Julia fumbled for words, her bravado crumbling under the authority of something she couldn't control. My parents shifted awkwardly, exchanging glances that said more than any lecture ever could. This was not going as planned. And somewhere beneath all of that, buried under the layers of frustration and the shock of confrontation, I felt a surge of something deeper, a quiet, steady, irrepressible hope. Hope that the next time I wouldn't be powerless. Hope that I could finally reclaim ownership, not just of my things, but of my life, my choices, my dignity. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I knew I was no longer waiting for permission. I was in control. For the first time in my life, I saw it, the crack in Julia's armor, the fissure that revealed the true person beneath the polished, entitled facade she had worn for years. Her smug, triumphant expression faltered hard enough that it almost made me blink in disbelief. She was unprepared. She had assumed, as always, that the world bent toward her whims, that every misstep she made would somehow land on someone else's plate, preferably mine. "Mom, Dad, say something." Julia's voice rang out, high-pitched and frantic, a mix of outrage and panic. Her hands flailed toward them, as if their intervention could rewrite reality. She expected their habitual defense, the same reflexive shield they had raised for her countless times before. But instead she found nothing. Silence. My father's face had drained of color, the rosy hue that often signaled calm authority gone, replaced by confusion and the subtle tremor of someone confronted with undeniable truth. "Wait, so the car isn't ours." His voice wavered, disbelief threading through each word, as if the revelation contradicted the very rules of the universe he had always believed in. I turned slowly to him, the calmest I had felt in years, letting my gaze linger on him with all the quiet weight of inevitability. "It was never yours," I said, each word deliberate, measured, impossible to refute. "You handed away something that wasn't yours to give. You chose Julia again, as you always do. And now you're both standing in the wreckage with her." The sentence landed like a hammer. My words weren't raised, weren't dramatic, but they carried the power of truth. It cut through the habitual defenses, the excuses, the rehearsed rationalizations my parents had used for decades to justify favoritism. They had always assumed I was powerless, that I would absorb the costs, that I would bend to their orchestrated narrative of family hierarchy. They hadn't counted on foresight, on preparation, on the kind of quiet, determined strategy that I had nurtured for months, years even. The silence that followed was deafening, thick, and tangible, pressing against all of us. The kind of silence that exposes everything unspoken, all the grudges, the inequities, the patterns that had been normalized but never challenged. It stretched out, taut with tension, as Julia's expression shifted from panic to disbelief to anger, and finally to helplessness. She glanced at my parents, hoping for some rescue, some validation, but the usually unshakable alliance she relied upon was gone. The rules had changed, and she hadn't read the new playbook. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them, the dramatic mask of entitlement slipping away to reveal raw vulnerability, anger, and shock all at once. "It's not fair," she shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of unanticipated defeat. She stamped her foot, jerking at her hair, her small tantrum echoing down the empty street, but it rang hollow against the immovable reality I had laid before her. Mom tried to argue, her words sharp at first, clipped with indignation, ready to restore some semblance of control, to defend the golden child as she always did. But every sentence died on her lips, suffocated by the logic she could no longer evade. The legal documents, the insurance stipulations, the ironclad reality that I had orchestrated, they were immovable, and no amount of parental defense could change that. I felt the tide of victory settle around me in a way I had never allowed myself to experience before. My chest rose and fell not with adrenaline, not with fear, but with the steady, deep rhythm of someone reclaiming what had always been theirs. Every year of being overshadowed, overlooked, and dismissed crystallized in this moment. Every unfair comparison, every whispered slight, every opportunity lost to Julia's advantage, reduced to dust in the face of cold, undeniable fact. Julia's face twisted, tears streaming freely now, a mixture of rage, shock, and self-pity. She had always believed the world would bend to her charm, her exaggerations, her inherited favoritism. She had counted on me being the same Isabel I had always been, compliant, muted, willing to absorb the consequences. But that Isabel no longer existed. Dad's shoulders slumped, the rigid posture of authority crumbling as he finally understood the magnitude of the oversight, the hubris that had led them to assume control over something that legally and morally was never theirs to dictate. Mom's usual composure faltered too, the habitual shrug replaced by a hesitant, almost guilty pause, realizing that the scales had finally shifted. They had misjudged not just me, but the consequences of underestimating foresight, preparation, and personal agency. I stood tall, every ounce of restraint and strategy paying off in the unspoken authority that radiated from me. The wrecked Sedan, the shattered front end, the flattened tire, it didn't sting like it had before. In this moment, it was proof of foresight, proof that I could protect myself even when everyone else failed to see the truth. For the first time, I wasn't the one on the losing end, bending to family expectations or absorbing the fallout of someone else's recklessness. This time, I was the architect of the outcome. And for the first time, I felt it. A quiet, profound triumph. Not loud, not boastful, but undeniable. A reckoning had occurred, not through anger or confrontation, but through preparedness, clarity, and unwavering resolve. The tables had turned. The golden child was exposed. The parents were forced to witness their own misjudgment. And me? I was finally free, finally in control, finally on the side of victory. I walked away from the wreck that day, not the car, but the family wreck. The mangled Sedan sitting against the streetlight, its airbags hanging slack and torn, its front end crumpled into a shameful heap, was only a symbol. The real destruction, the real lesson, was the chaos of favoritism and entitlement that had been normalized in my household for years. Every glance, every shrug, every offhand comment had been a silent confirmation. Julia first, Isabel second, or sometimes not at all. I had spent decades calibrating my behavior, measuring my successes against invisible rules, wondering why effort alone could never suffice. And yet, in that moment of ruin, I realized something profound. I didn't have to prove my worth to them anymore. I didn't have to bend, apologize, or suppress my own desires just to make room for Julia's whims. Watching my parents' faces collapse under the weight of their own favoritism, seeing Julia flounder as the consequences of her entitlement finally landed squarely on her, I understood that the battle I had been fighting for recognition and approval had been a self-imposed cage. I had mistaken compliance for survival, deference for love, and approval for validation. But now that illusion had shattered. I remembered all the times I had watched Julia walk away unscathed from mistakes I would have been chastised for. I remembered the scholarship she had claimed, the rent-free years she had enjoyed, the constant string of minor catastrophes she caused with no repercussions. And I remembered my own quiet sacrifices. The part-time jobs to cover bills, the extra shifts to keep the household afloat, the dreams deferred for the sake of maintaining harmony. I could feel the weight of those years lifting from my shoulders. I had prepared, I had protected, and I had won. Not with confrontation, not with fury, but with foresight and control. Months later, I bought myself another car. This time there was no tension, no anticipation, no expectation that it would ever be handed over, questioned, or undermined. The purchase was deliberate, personal, and entirely mine. I parked it in the driveway of my own apartment, in a space I had earned and maintained without apology. The keys rested securely in my pocket, a small but significant talisman of autonomy. Every time I touched them, I felt a quiet thrill, a reassurance that this life, these choices, were mine to command. The car was not flashy. It wasn't a symbol to impress anyone else. It was simply a marker of independence, a testament to the power of foresight and self-reliance. I learned that justice doesn't always arrive with fanfare. It isn't always loud, dramatic, or public. Sometimes it manifests in quiet, unassuming ways, a signature on a document, a policy clause written with precision, A decision made before others even imagined the need for it. The subtle victories, the ones no one else notices, can carry the heaviest weight. They are durable, lasting, and immune to interference from those who believe they are entitled to your life. Driving that new Sedan for the first time, windows down and the wind whipping across my face, the sensation was transformative. The air felt sharper, cleaner, untainted by the residual tension that had long lingered whenever I navigated family gatherings, conversations, or casual check-ins. Each mile I put between myself and the wrecked car, the arguments, the favoritism, was a mile toward clarity, autonomy, and emotional liberation. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my happiness against Julia's approval or my parents' expectations. I was simply present in my own life, owning it, shaping it, and protecting it with deliberate care. Peace, I realized, was the rarest luxury. Not the peace bought with money, nor the fleeting calm of temporary victories. The peace I felt was earned, cultivated through strategy, patience, and refusal to submit to unfair patterns. It was the knowledge that no one, not Julia, not my parents, could unseat me again, could undermine the boundaries I had set, could diminish the life I had carved out for myself. It was freedom in its most tangible, most satisfying form. And so, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the road, I let myself smile, not with triumph over anyone else, but with satisfaction in my own agency. The wind tousled my hair, warm and relentless, and I felt a clarity I hadn't known was possible. For the first time, I wasn't defined by family drama, parental favoritism, or the expectations imposed upon me. I was defined by my choices, my foresight, and my refusal to let history repeat itself. Sometimes justice doesn't scream. Sometimes it whispers quietly through the careful preparation of a life lived with intention. Sometimes liberation isn't about confrontation. It's about taking control of what is yours and refusing to relinquish it. And as I pressed the accelerator gently, watching the city blur past, I understood fully that this moment, this peace, this freedom was mine entirely. Julia couldn't take it. My parents couldn't undo it. And most importantly, I didn't need their validation to feel whole. I drove on, the wind in my hair and the road ahead clear, and for the first time I felt untouchable, not in arrogance, but in the quiet, enduring power of owning my life.